If you've watched my earlier video regarding a Japanese prophetic manga, then you won't want to miss this one at all. Due to a similar prophecy, this time created in the year by an American seer, 2025 is going to chill you to the bone, spine. And what is most unnerving is, according to the prophecy, this year, the year 2025, will be a watershed in human history. History, a pivotal point that might influence the world's destiny. So let's investigate what this prophecy actually is. Out in the video for today, so buckle up, belt as we explore the mysteries of today. But initially, you may be able to change your luck. If before watching this video, you liked and subscribed, concludes Lombard, Carol. Ever pondered whether you have the opportunity to predict your own destiny? Would you decide to be aware of it? Or would you still prefer to wait for everything to happen? Of course, such a question could seem straightforward initially, but it's not at all simple to respond because, in the event that what you discovered turned out to be tragic, that was unavoidable. In America, in the 1940s, there was a woman who had a peculiar and inexplicable ability to perceive things that were yet to arrive. Occasionally, long into the she was able to predict someone's future career, the once a destined relationship would start, and even the one day someone would leave this life. Jean Dixon was her name. It was a name that would eventually come to represent prophecy and clairvoyance during the January 10th, 1942, 20th century. Interior and upscale beauty parlor set aside for the middle-aged social elite in America. A woman with an anxious look came over. Celebrity Carol Lombard, who it was when she was at the height of her career, the unfamiliar speaker said in a quiet yet concerned tone, informing Lombard, "I know this may seem irrational, yet over the next 6 months, please refrain from flying. Your life will be in jeopardy if you do." Carol grinned, half appreciative, half ignoring the odd warning she just received. Received, she calmly responded, "Courtesy. I have a few days to flight planned, but don't worry. I believe I'll be all right." Following that, the actress moved aside and went inside the VIP lounge without further consideration of the warning, which she had only heard 6 days earlier. Later, on January 16th, 1942, she took off. Would never come because the plane crashed. Because of pilot error into a mountain, all there are 22 passengers, including Carol. Lombard was murdered by the lady who provided that caution wasn't some strange or busybody, as many may have believed. Jean Dixon was among the most significant psychics in American history, who would go on to make world predictions. Shocking incidents following the passing of a president to the superpowers ascent and even worldwide turmoil in the years to come. Franklin D. Roosevelt arrived in the United States in March 1933, was thrust far into the shadows of unemployment during the Great Depression. Crop prices had dropped by more than 25%, up to 60%, and more than 2 million of Americans had been displaced. It happened during this hopeless and Franklin Roosevelt's hour. Becoming the 32nd president of he stood on the United States platform for the inauguration without a victorious grin, yet with the determined eyes of a man who now held the final aspirations of a whole country on his Roosevelt pledge to rewrite the shoulders. America's future and via for. He did what during his successive stints in office no president, past or present, has ever accomplished. But by 1944, at age 62, the steely will was betrayed by his body. That had characterized his time as president. Health had grown to be a major issue with increasing blood pressure, diagnosis arteriosclerosis due to pressure and other difficulties, but all of this had Jean Dixon had earlier predicted. On her in the morning of November 1944, the telephone reverberated through Jean Dixon's small house. When she responded, there was just a brief message from the president on the other end. Would prefer to see you before the queue went quiet. Dixon entered carefully, and the waiting vehicle parked close to her door that led her directly to she had been to the White House. A few years prior, at a charity event occasion where she had momentarily encountered this time as she stood in front of the president, Roosevelt didn't discuss face-to-face. Instead, he questioned war and national policy. "You can tell it's very personal. How long do I have left in this?" Function Jean Dixon didn't think twice about replied strongly yet quietly. Not more than 6 months, and only a couple of months later, Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, April 12, 1945, died precisely as she had stated his successor in line with one of her prior to this, Senator Harry S. Truman, a man who had previously Dixon had informed him that one day he would become the U.S. president. The gift of being able to look into the future. However, it is also a hardship, particularly for the person carrying it on behalf of Jean Dixon. Such capability initially appeared and she was born in 1904 and spent her early years there. In the Wisconsin state, becomes an Orthodox Catholic household from a very her parents started to notice her at a young age. That's something about their youngest daughter, who is only 5. Jean frequently demanded that her mother handed her a black envelope. She made the identical request over the border, and repeatedly during the day, even as the mother refused, stating that they're 10 days without such an envelope in the house. Later, a letter came in from a faraway place. It was a funeral announcement, relative. Jean's grandfather was deceased. The envelope containing the letter had a black border, much like the little that was the first thing the girl had described. When her family became aware that Jean had a talent that was considerably superior to the routine. On another time, although her dad was out on a work trip in Chicago, Jean was just 7 years old at the time. Abruptly faced a mother, full of anticipation that daddy will bring home a huge large dog with black and white fur. At the time, her mother chuckled. Communication over large distances was slow and none of the family members had ever brought up considering acquiring a dog. But only after a few days, her father came back with a white and black puppy that complemented her description. At that very moment in 1911. A unique chance arose for her parents were informed that an Egyptian palm reader had just arrived in California. A well-known throughout the community of immigrants for her ability to discern fate with their hands. After researching, he brought Jean to meet her. The child's hand for a brief period of time, the woman raised her head, her eyes reflecting anything that was beyond the realm of speech. She then informed Jean's parents about the capture. Your daughter is going to be a fantastic prophet, someone with the ability to look into the future. She then gave a tiny crystal ball to Jean, and a little of silk, as well as the instant Jean held something odd in her hands. The tiny girl stood silently for some while, then abruptly glanced at the female, and murmured softly, "Be cautious when handling the stove. You're going to become burned." A few days later, the lady got hurt in the kitchen, just like Jean had foreseen the future and warned Jean about her own elder brother throughout their time together. One day, while playing in the backyard, she declared abruptly, "You're going to be a renowned sportsman one day." It sounded like a child's voice at the moment. Harmless comment, but 10 years later, she would acknowledge brother as one of America's best football players. Some referred to it as a gift from God. Others said she possessed a divine link, but it was one thing nonetheless. Jean Dixon was obviously someone who able to predict the future. Churchill, Winston among the first forecasts that introduced Jean Dixon to the world. Focus was a prediction regarding at the time. Winston Churchill was acting as the United Nations Prime Minister Kingdom and is generally considered to be one of the most powerful leaders of the in 1945, the 20th century. While visiting in the U.S., Churchill looked for Jean Dixon asked her a straightforward question, "Will I be?" without hesitation. She said she was re-elected. That fate would not allow him to choose a different path in spite of the status and authority he currently possessed. Churchill's cheeks turned red with rage over nobody could have predicted the outcome at the time, aside from his triumph. But just a handful months later, the prophecy was fulfilled. The general election that Churchill lost in the United Kingdom. Although the forecast that sent a shockwave through America was Jean Dixon's forecast of death for in 1956. President John F. Kennedy in a Parade magazine piece in which she anticipated that the Democratic nominee would be elected president in 1960. However, that he would be killed during his initial Kennedy's term at the time had not even formally announced his intention to run, and her forecast was either overlooked or rejected as a publicity gimmick. But by 1963, following Kennedy's election as president, Jean Dixon started to experience far more intense foreshadowing. She noticed a gloomy cloud looming over a pair of black hands and the White House removing the president's name off the sign outside his workplace. And as though the pictures weren't scary enough, she additionally noticed an odd name that included of 5 or 6 characters that start with an O as a second letter S, and the last letter with a tail that is hooked, similar to on November 22, 1963. Fish hook. the assassination of President Kennedy in Dallas, Texas. The whole news cast country into grief in a matter of hours. Later, a name appeared on the Lee Harvey Oswald on the television screen. The name of the man suspected of the assassination. That was just what Jean Dixon possessed. Explained the final D, the O, and the S. People were in, or as it bent like a hook. Considering that the prophecy had not just been exact in its result, it had been in all of its minute nuances from that time on the media started calling her. She was no longer the seer of Washington. It was just an odd woman warning that people disregarded. She had turned into an emblem of what science was unable to explain. During her career, Jean Dixon, the 2025 prophecy didn't merely forecast the ascent and decline of historical occurrences or political persons. She also discussed topics that had not before occurred that, according to her, would not just change one country, but might change everyone's destiny. Among all the prophesies, mankind, the year 2025 was the one she made. She reiterated and once more in 1971. Jean Dixon released The Call to Glory is a novel in which she outlined a vision that went beyond the immediate. However, it reached a worldwide conflict in 2020 is far off. Will occur? Not a shooting war and bombs similar to its predecessors, but a conflict of illness during the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many people reflected on this passage in 2020, with a feeling of unpleasant acknowledgement that a crisis that stopped the globe in its tracks, closed economies, and resulted in millions of deaths. Was this the end of the world? Dixon previously warned of, and if that was just the start of what lies ahead for us. The year 2025, which she said would bring a watershed in human history. According to the forecasts made in her book, Jean Dixon, My Life and Prophesies, underlined that 2025 will be a violent pivotal moment between two powerful nations, Russia and China, and Asia in the perspective. She explained their conflict wouldn't be limited to politics or territorial conflicts. There would be a struggle for authority over the course of the world, and she ultimately asserted China would win the battle. That prophecy may seem unrealistic, particularly considering that we are currently several months into 2025 and still no dispute has arisen between those two countries. But it's important to remember that Dixon's forecasts have frequently been remarkably accurate in their results, have further demonstrated differences in who is today. The globe is engaged in the border of a completely distinct type of dispute and a tense economic impasse between China and the United States, and it begs the question of whether Dixon's was a vision misinterpreted. Genuinely anticipating this particular trade war, it is impossible to know for sure. The solution will become clear in time. But what makes this year even more eerie is that there were others besides Jean Dixon who made reference to it in 1999. Tatsuki is a Japanese manga artist. Released a comic book called The. I noticed that she recorded 15 in the future. 14 of them have already experienced prophetic dreams. Fulfill the last dream, the one that has not yet occurred, and resolves a particular date. July 5, 2025. Based on that, imagine a catastrophe much worse than the 311th earthquake to hit Japan will occur in the new land mass, and the South China Sea will emerge from the sea, joining Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan, and the Philippines, and the tale is far from over. Additionally, a man in Japan is claiming to be an individual who traveled back in time to 2062. Showed up on a well-known online forum prior to the tragic March 11th. He posted a warning about the earthquake, asking citizens to evacuate to a higher location. Than he came back in 2022 with another chilling South China Sea message. Won't be at ease. Get ready for something never seen in July of. Is 2025 really a coincidence? Or is it a caution that the world has not yet completely there? Grasped Jean Dixon once remarked. Will be conflict, yet concurrently an infinitely loving and compassionate person. This individual will come out and re-establish contact. The broken ties that bind humanity to lead them to ultimate serenity. Maybe there will be unrest in 2025, but perhaps there's a light in that long night. The real thing is waiting at the end of the road. The catastrophe itself might not be the source of worry, but in our failure to get ready for it even after we've been cautioned. During the lengthy arc of humanity has always been tormented by history, by asking a misleadingly straightforward query, will the future be altered, or has it already occurred? Been written with no action on our part. But hold off until it gets there. The Earth might not be able to be stopped from shaking, preventing a storm, or regulate the deep's movements and agitated sea. But we can decide who's when those times arrive. We hold hands, and occasionally, a single hand reaching the darkness outside is sufficient to make us believe that everything will work out. Might not accept all that was simply stated, that perhaps prophecy is just a faith-based issue or nothing more than unrelated. However, if you've ever heard an odd forecast, if you've ever had a dream that you were unable to describe, or had an incident that left you feeling there is something that defies common sense, then leave a comment with your opinions below. And if you want to retain pursuing tales as enigmatic as this, remember to tune in and subscribe. I'll see you in the notification bell. The following video